The New Orleans Pelicans are off to the worst start in franchise history and are on pace to win less than 15 games. Now, no one could have foreseen how the year was going to play out for the Pelicans, but I promise you right now, this is not what the organization had in mind when they went out and traded for a guy like DeJounte Murray. Not only did they give up 2 future first-round picks, but they also traded away a rising star in Dyson Daniels. Now, the Dyson Daniels we're seeing right now in Atlanta is nothing like the player we saw for New Orleans. In fact, in a recent interview, Dyson Daniels came out and said that he's glad he's no longer with the Pelicans because there seems to be some sort of curse surrounding the organization. And that's exactly what I want to talk about in today's video. All the troubles and tribulations that the Pelicans have had to go through only a few months into this season. For starters, let's jump to opening day. And can you guess who wasn't available to play opening day? Zion Williamson. Now, this one was more predictable than the rest because Zion Williamson is now in his 6th year in the NBA, and for a majority of the seasons, he hasn't played over 20 games. It's really hard for Zion Williamson to stay healthy, and that shouldn't be too surprising because a majority of draft analysts predicted this before he got selected first overall in 2019. But of course, the talent, the hype surrounding Zion was too much to pass on. And had Zion Williamson lived up to that generational hype, then New Orleans would be in a completely different situation than the one they find themselves in currently. But of course, that isn't what happened. Now, as of this year for Zion Williamson, he's only gone out and played in 6 games out of the nearly 30 that the Pelicans have had. And in those 6 games, he averages about 31 minutes a night while shooting 45% from the field. And that is much lower than his career average. Zion Williams' shooting has been down along with his points because he's only gone out and averaged 22.7 points. Now, the things that have improved are his blocking, which is up to 1.2, his assists, which is up to 5.3, and a career high in total rebounds, which is about 8 per night. However, we should take these numbers with a grain of salt because this is not a large sample size to work with. At the end of the day, Zion Williamson has only played in 6 games and has really only played in 1 game since early November because he's been dealing with a hamstring issue that just doesn't seem to go away. Maybe if Zion Williamson tried a bit harder to lose weight, we would see him play on the court more often. Now, there are rumors that the Pelicans are shopping just about any and everybody at this point, but if we're being real, Zion is still at the beginning of a huge contract, one that the Pelicans clearly overpaid him on, so who knows if any team is going to be willing to take on that massive contract that Zion Williamson comes with. So in the end, Zion Williamson might not be traded away from this team. And we'll talk more about players who are missing from injury for the Pelicans in a second. But for right now, I just wanted to remind you guys to slow down, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 10,000. It would be very helpful if you subscribe. Alright, now let's get back to talking about this injury-plagued New Orleans Pelicans team. And the next guy I want to mention is Brandon Ingram. You know, Zion Williams co-star, but at the end of the day, you know, Brandon Ingram has been more of a star for the Pelicans than Zion Williamson has ever been. When it comes to a guy like Brandon Ingram, he's played the most amount of games for the Pelicans out of their opening day starters, which isn't really saying a lot because he himself has only played in 18 out of their nearly 30 games, and he's currently out with an ankle injury that he suffered a few weeks ago. And even before that ankle injury, Brandon Ingram wasn't his true self. Sure, he was averaging 22 points a night, 5.6 rebounds, 5.2 assists, but he was also shooting 46% from the field, which is much lower than his averages over the past 2 seasons in New Orleans. And if there was any real trade candidate on the market for the Pelicans, it's this guy. Brandon Ingram is still only 27 years old and has plenty more basketball left in him. And while he may be considered a bit injury prone, he's not nearly as bad as Zion Williamson. And you also have to take into account the fact that Brandon Ingram is on the last year of his deal. And if anything, this is the largest factor in all of this. Sure, he's making $36 million now, but if he hits free agency, there is a very low chance he signs with the Pelicans. He's been on the Pelicans for 6 years now, ever since getting traded from LA in the Anthony Davis trade. And in those 6 years, the Pelicans have accomplished a whole lot of nothing. There hasn't been any real success in the Brandon Ingram era in New Orleans. So it's time that the Pelicans decide to blow it all up, get rid of Zion, CJ, DeJounte, and Brandon Ingram at all costs. And if that means selling low on Brandon Ingram, then you gotta do it, because you don't want to end up how the Chicago Bulls look now. They took too long to sell, now all of their valuable pieces aren't so valuable anymore, and they're stuck in the middle ground, where sure, the Bulls might make the playoffs, but even if they do, they'll be first round exits. And if you're a sensible organization in this league, that's just not where you want to find yourself, which is why I believe that Brandon Ingram is going to get moved before the deadline. Another player that could possibly be moved is CJ McCollum, who does have a little less value than Brandon Ingram, but there are a few more years left on his deal. Now, CJ is already 33 years old and well past his prime, but that doesn't mean there is zero left in the tank for him. He's gone out and averaged a solid 21 points a night, nearly 4 rebounds, nearly 4 assists, while shooting 43% from the field and 32% from the three-point line. Now, those shooting splits are pretty garbage, but maybe things change depending on his circumstances. There's belief around the league that Dame wants to reunite with CJ McCollum. And while that team might be terrible defensively, Giannis will make up for it, so you got that. Now, CJ McCollum is no different than the rest of the Pelicans starters, because he himself has only played in 15 games this year. However, where CJ differs from a guy like Zion and Brandon Ingram is that he is currently healthy. He is currently in the lineup, which is a huge plus, especially when it comes to the trade market. You need a guy who is 100% healthy and can pass a physical. So CJ is probably going to get moved before this year's deadline as well, because there is no way that the Pelicans don't sell. They are 5-23. They will most likely reach 40 losses before they reach 10 wins. That's just the way that their season has gone. And those aren't the only stars that have been missing a lot of time for the Pelicans. Just about everybody on this roster has dealt with injuries at one point or another in this very young season. I haven't even touched on their new acquisition in DeJounte Murray. Now, DeJounte Murray injured his hand almost immediately, which kept him out for the first couple of weeks. But he has returned since then. And in the games that DeJounte Murray has played for the Pelicans, well, it's only been 11, but he's averaged a solid 32 minutes a night while getting 16.4 points, 6.4 rebounds, and 6.9 assists, and 2 steals, on also shooting 36% from the field and 28% from the three-point line. You thought you'd see his shooting splits improve after leaving Atlanta, but that just isn't what's happened for DeJounte Murray. Now, Murray is a guy who I feel like the organization doesn't want to move on from too quickly here, because they did only trade for him in June. So if they moved on from him now, it would send a clear message that the Pelicans have no idea what they're doing. I mean, to go from buyers to sellers like that overnight is a real giveaway that your organization is in some deep, deep shit. But if there's anybody that can uplift them, it's probably their head coach, who I don't think deserves any of the blame this season. There's only so many different moves that Willie Green can do in this rotation when half of your players are out. Of course, this is Willie Green's 4th year as the head coach for New Orleans, and the way they're playing, he probably won't have a job come this time next year. He is probably going to be the fall guy for the organization, and I don't think he deserves that. But what else are the Pelicans going to do? They've been stuck in this consistent cycle of rebuilding ever since joining the league back in 2003. I've covered just about every major injury that the Pelicans have suffered so far, and there are plenty more that I haven't even gotten to yet. But like I said, I'm going to wrap it up here. So catch y'all later. Deuces.